Matt Gaetz once wore a gas mask while voting on a coronavirus bill, but there's more to the congressman than just headline-making stunts. From inviting a Holocaust denier to a speech to accusations of sex crimes, Gaetz' personal life has gotten him into a lot of hot water. Matt Gaetz was elected to the House of Representatives in 2016 and is both a devoted Trump follower and a staple of the far right. In October 2023, Gaetz made history when he successfully led the charge in removing Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. It was the first time ever that a Speaker of the House had been ejected from office.
Chaos is Speaker McCarthy.
McCarthy, who had only held the post for 9 months, had upset Gaetz and his fellow Republican hardliners for making a deal with Democrats to avoid a government shutdown.
You all know Matt Gaetz. You know it was personal.
Gaetz has always been a pretty polarizing figure and has made many enemies, even amongst those in his own party. After McCarthy's removal, Republican Congressman Carlos Jimenez didn't pull any punches, telling Politico, "Gaetz has very few friends in the conference. Gaetz maybe has a couple of friends in the delegation, but I'm not one of them. He's about clicks. I think he gets off on that." In Donald Trump's final hours as president, he issued a lot of pardons. Matt Gaetz was not on the list. However, the New York Times reported that Gaetz had approached Trump's aides and requested a blanket preemptive pardon. Gaetz reportedly wanted the pardon just in case he was found guilty of anything in the future. Sources reported that he had also asked for pardons for 2 unidentified associates. What's not clear, however, is whether or not Gaetz knew that the Justice Department was already asking questions about allegations that he had been in a sexual relationship with a minor. Trump himself later declared in a statement that Gaetz had never asked him for a pardon. Gaetz' supporters didn't deny that he had talked about a pardon, but went on to claim that it was all a big misunderstanding that stemmed from comments he made on Fox News just after Joe Biden took the presidential election. Gaetz was quoted as saying that Trump supporters like himself were facing a bloodlust from the radical left. He then advised President Trump to pardon everyone from himself to Joe Exotic from Netflix's Tiger King.
Is that Joe Exotic? That's Joe Exotic.
In 2021, an investigation was opened into accusations that Gaetz had not only engaged in a sexual relationship with a minor, but had also paid the then 17-year-old to travel with him across state lines. Gaetz' name surfaced as part of an investigation into one of his associates. It was alleged that he was one of several people who recruited women online and then arranged payment for sex. Shortly after those accusations broke, CBS News reported that authorities were also investigating a trip he had taken to the Bahamas. In that investigation, it was alleged that the congressman had purchased female escorts, which would also have fallen under the umbrella of human trafficking. In a statement to CBS, Gaetz' camp denied all of the charges, saying, "Representative Gaetz has never paid for sex, nor has he had sex with an underage girl. It's interesting to watch the Washington wheels grinding so hard every time one of their falsehoods gets knocked down." In 2023, Gaetz' attorneys announced that the Department of Justice had finished their inquiry and there would be no official charges filed. Even as the Justice Department started an inquiry into allegations that Matt Gaetz had been involved in certain sex crimes, his father was reportedly approached with a proposition. According to the Washington Post, Don Gaetz was told that his son's legal worries would go away if he financed the rescue mission of Robert A. Levinson, an American hostage who was being held by Iran. It didn't take long for Matt Gaetz to go public with both the request and the name of the person who made it, which kind of had 2 effects. Not only did it blow the extortion racket, but it shifted part of the focus away from the initial investigation.
And I won't be extorted.
The elder Gaetz produced evidence in the form of text messages. A few months later, it was announced that Stephen Alford, a Florida businessman, was in court to enter a guilty plea in his attempt to extort the Gaetz family of $25 million. Alford was ultimately sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. Interestingly, Matt Gaetz then claimed that there was much more to the story than was being reported. The congressman wrote on X, formerly known as Twitter, "Alford wasn't acting alone. DOJ is having him take the fall to protect their own." Gaetz also claimed that the investigation into him was a planted leak to cover up the extortion. In 2022, Matt Gaetz was still in the middle of being investigated into accusations that he had paid women for sex and had taken them across state lines to do so. Which is why it was so weird that Gaetz voted against a piece of legislation that was designed to protect the victims of sex trafficking. The legislation in question earmarked a little over $1 billion to be spent on programs aiding the victims of trafficking. It also provided funding for law enforcement investigations into child trafficking and online predators. As if that wasn't surprising enough, it was actually the second time Gaetz had voted against laws designed to protect the victims of sex trafficking. Gaetz explained his reasoning to The Hill, saying that the 2022 legislation would serve as a backdoor loophole for illegal immigration. Back in 2013, the Florida legislature started working on a bill that would make posting revenge porn illegal. Seems like a no-brainer that would get bipartisan support, right? Not exactly. In 2021, the Washington Post spoke with Tom Goodson, a former member of the Florida House of Representatives. He spearheaded Florida's anti-revenge porn bill and said he had one major opponent, Matt Gaetz. Gaetz had previously been a member of the Florida House of Representatives from 2010 to 2016. Goodson told the Washington Post, "Matt was absolutely against it. He thought the picture was his to do with what he wanted. He thought that any picture was his to use as he wanted to, as an expression of his right." The bill still passed, with Gaetz's no vote being one of just 2 that voted against it. Also in 2021, CNN reported that multiple sources had told them that Gaetz was well known for sharing nude photos and videos of women he said he had slept with. Sources had also claimed that Gaetz had played the videos while on the floor of the House. Gaetz's behavior reportedly warranted a meeting with then-Speaker Paul Ryan. However, Gaetz denied such a meeting ever took place. In 2018, Matt Gaetz's plan to invite his father to Donald Trump's State of the Union address fell through when the elder Gaetz came down with a nasty case of bronchitis. That was about the same time the Florida congressman started talking to a new acquaintance named Chuck Johnson. Together, Gaetz and Johnson would chat about hot-button topics like cryptocurrency. So given his new friendship, Gaetz decided to invite Johnson along instead. After issuing the invite, a Gaetz staffer did a simple Google search and learned that the congressman's new friend was, as Politico says, an infamous troll. Gaetz later said he was unaware of Johnson's online behavior prior to inviting him to the speech. Although Johnson claims that labels like white nationalist and Holocaust denier are inaccurate, Mother Jones has pointed out that he shared his thoughts on World War II in a Reddit thread, writing, "I do not and never have believed the 6 million figure. I think the Red Cross numbers of 250,000 dead in the camps from typhus are more realistic. I agree about Auschwitz and the gas chambers not being real." He's also been banned from X, regularly used racial slurs, and has said he believes races are biologically different. Gaetz was widely condemned for not rescinding the invitation, but explained to Politico, "I don't only associate with people who hold all my views. I don't have an ideological purity test." The uproar just about died down when Johnson showed up at a fundraiser for Gaetz's re-election campaign, raising eyebrows yet again. After joining Congress in 2017, Matt Gaetz painted himself as a supporter of animal rights. He explained to Roll Call, "My mother raised my sister and I to believe you can judge any person by how they treat innocent and defenseless animals, so we've always had rescue pets in our home growing up." At the time, he had 3 rescues, 2 dogs and a cat, and his work with animal rights groups earned him the Humane Society's endorsement. Since his election to the House, Gaetz has championed multiple pieces of legislation that extended protections to animals. He's also been one of the loudest voices speaking out against greyhound racing. In 2019, he was one of a handful of lawmakers who appeared at an event promoting the adoption of X-racing greyhounds. While attending the event, Gaetz also told the Palm Beach Post that the industry's days were numbered, adding, "We won. Greyhound racing is done. If the owners aren't willing to cooperate, they may face animal cruelty charges. We will utilize a carrot or they will face the stick." In 2023, Matt Gaetz told reporters, "I am the most investigated man in the United States Congress. It seems that the Ethics Committee's interest in me waxes and wanes based on my relationship with the Speaker. It hasn't just been the Ethics Committee that's found some dirt on him, though." In 2021, the Daily Beast reported that Gaetz hadn't paid some of the fees required by the Florida Bar. Interestingly, the Florida Bar didn't seem to notice until after the article ran. As a result, they immediately declared him ineligible to practice law. The move sent Gaetz scrambling to pay his fees and get reinstated. It's no secret that Matt Gaetz is one of Donald Trump's biggest supporters.
He's solid as a rock, and he's a friend of mine, Matt Gaetz. Matt? Thank you, Matt.
He did, after all, push a 2018 petition to see Trump awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So it's not surprising that when Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, testified before the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Gaetz showed up, even though he wasn't invited. But it was surprising when Gaetz sent an ill-advised tweet that some perceive as a threat to Cohen. The tweet was deemed so far out of line that CNBC reported it could lead to an investigation of witness tampering. The tweet read, "Hey, Michael Cohen, do your wife and father-in-law know about your girlfriends? Maybe tonight would be a good time for that chat. I wonder if she'll remain faithful when you're in prison. She's about to learn a lot." According to Vanity Fair, Gaetz said it was fine that he stepped up to challenge Cohen's character because Cohen had a history of lying. When Gaetz finally did issue an apology, he also made sure to congratulate himself for crossing a line to defend Trump. It was later reported that Gaetz would not face disciplinary action for the tweet and instead got a warning letter from the Florida Bar. In 2019, Matt Gaetz went on a tirade about Hunter Biden's struggles with addiction. During his 5-minute speech in a hearing room on Capitol Hill, Gaetz said, "It's a little hard to believe that Burisma hired Hunter Biden to resolve their international disputes when he could not resolve his own dispute with Hertz rental car, leaving cocaine and a crack pipe in the car." According to the Washington Post, that led Georgia's Hank Johnson to observe, "I would say that the pot calling the kettle black is not something we should do. I don't know what members, if any, have had problems with substance abuse, been busted in a DUI. I don't know, but if I did, I wouldn't raise it against anyone on this committee. I don't think it's proper." That was enough to silence the whole room, because Johnson did know that in 2008, Gaetz was arrested for a DUI. The case was dropped partially on a technicality, seeing as the prosecutor's stepson was a friend of Gaetz, and partially because of the force used to make the arrest. Gaetz later told the Northwest Florida Daily News that he was pleased the truth had come out. In July of 2022, Gaetz made a series of misogynistic comments while speaking at Turning Point USA's Student Action Summit in Tampa. The congressman said, in part, "Why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions?" The congressman then added,
Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb.
However, when he was given the chance to backpedal, Gaetz doubled down and responded, "Be offended." Gaetz's remarks went over about as well as can be expected, but they also had an impact that the congressman probably didn't expect. Olivia Juliana is a political strategy specialist with Gen Z for Change and thanked Gaetz for his remarks. Juliana noted that after his comments, her organization received around $700,000 in donations, which would be distributed to abortion services nationwide.
I'm not for everyone. I get that.
In 2018, Matt Gaetz had set his sights on changing federal marijuana legislation. While working on a state level, Gaetz spearheaded the movement to legalize medical marijuana, and with H.R. 2020, moved to do the same thing for the nation.
Federal prohibition against marijuana has not worked.
Fast forward to 2022, and a piece of legislation called the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act was introduced in the House. If written into law, the bill would not only make marijuana legal at the federal level, it would also get rid of previous convictions. The bill passed in the House by the narrowest of margins, with Matt Gaetz being one of a handful of Republicans who voted for it. The following year, Gaetz put forward legislation that would do away with marijuana testing for enlisted military. That's not the entire story, though. According to the Associated Press, Gaetz's history of championing the legalization of marijuana was investigated as part of his 2018 Bahamas trip. He was joined on the trip by several campaign donors, including a doctor who was suspected of influencing Gaetz's position on marijuana legalization. Gaetz denied wrongdoing and stressed that he had been campaigning for marijuana legalization for years by the time the trip took place. In 2019, Matt Gaetz participated in a congressional hearing addressing gun violence and House Resolution 8, a piece of legislation that would have tightened background checks on gun sales. During the hearing, Gaetz argued, "I hope we do not forget the pain and anguish and sense of loss felt by those all over the country who have been the victims of violence at the hands of illegal aliens." H.R. 8 would not have stopped the many of the circumstances I raised, but a wall, a barrier on the southern border, may have. The comments provoked outrage from the assembled gallery, which included Fred Gutenberg and Manuel Oliver. Both men lost children in the 2018 Parkland high school shooting. Gaetz tried to have the two parents removed for interrupting the hearings, but his request was denied by committee chair Jerry Nadler. Nadler later told CNN, "To bring up in a room full of parents of kids killed, Trump's border wall, which has nothing to do with this, is frankly insulting." In 2023, the New York Times noted that Matt Gaetz was one of 5 Republicans who were pushing the idea that the January 6th Capitol riot was an elaborate setup meant to imprison and torment innocent conservatives. And even though sentences continued to be handed down for key figures involved in the insurrection, Gaetz has still made some pretty brazen comments about what happened that day. According to Rolling Stone, his comments about January 6th were some of the loudest in the Republican Party. In an appearance on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, Gaetz said, "We're proud of the work that we did on January 6th to make legitimate arguments about election integrity. We did not want the Republican voice to go unheard." According to Gaetz, the real January 6th insurrectionists have been the FBI and everyone who was behind the nation's election fraud. Other critics, meanwhile, have raised questions about Gaetz's relationship with right-wing militias associated with January 6th. In 2020, Gaetz was photographed attending an event alongside members of the Proud Boys. Gaetz said on his Firebrand podcast, "Just because you take a picture with someone, it doesn't mean you're tied to every viewpoint they've ever had or that they will ever have in the future." Roll Call keeps track of all kinds of data, including the family status of various politicians. According to their 2019 data, Matt Gaetz was described by his own office as being single with no children. However, that changed in a big way just a year later, when Gaetz revealed that he had been raising a non-biological son for years. In an X post, Gaetz explained why he decided to come forward with the information, writing, "I was triggered when, to make an absurd debate point, a fellow congressman diminished the contributions of Republicans because we don't raise non-white kids." The fellow congressman in question was Louisiana's Cedric Richmond, and after their heated exchange, Gaetz went on X to introduce his then 19-year-old son Nestor Galban. Galban is a Cuban immigrant and the younger brother of Gaetz's ex-girlfriend. After his mother passed away from breast cancer, Galban lived with Gaetz and his then-girlfriend. Gaetz told Fox News' Tucker Carlson,
Nestor is the light of my life. I couldn't imagine him loving him any more if he was my own flesh and blood.
While some of Gaetz's fellow Congress members came forward to confirm that he'd always spoken about Galban behind the scenes, others weren't convinced. Critics accused him of using Galban as a political crutch, pointing to earlier social media posts where he referred to the teenager as a helper and local student. Few things in recent history have been as divisive as the COVID-19 pandemic. So in March of 2020, Matt Gaetz tried to make a point about the pandemic by wearing a gas mask while voting on a virus response package. The bill, which allocated more than $7.8 billion to outbreak-related needs, passed and was backed by Gaetz. However, Gaetz later said that he believed Democrats were trying to weaponize politics against then-President Trump.
I believe that Trump is necessary to maintain a brand of conservatism that is America first.
Then, just a few days after he wore the gas mask on the floor of the House, Gaetz said he was going to be self-quarantining after potentially being exposed to the virus at the Conservative Political Action Conference. However, his test results ultimately came back negative. In November of that same year, Gaetz told USA Today that while he had never experienced any symptoms of COVID, a positive antibodies test confirmed that he did contract the virus at some point. Still, more questions were raised about just how seriously he was taking the outbreak after he confirmed on X that he had allowed his son to visit a Panama City beach for spring break.
Yeah, I would say that the lockdowns have likely impacted a lot more Americans than even the virus or the illness have.
The month prior to Gaetz' announcement, WFSU Public Media reported that Panama City was the site of one of the country's worst COVID outbreaks. In 2020, X began adding fact-checking and warning labels to Donald Trump's tweets, flagging them as both incorrect and going against their policies about inciting violence. The social media site also hit Matt Gaetz with a warning after he wrote this about the 2020 George Floyd protests. "Now that we clearly see Antifa as terrorists, can we hunt them down like we do those in the Middle East?" Gaetz later wrote on X that the warning was a badge of honor. However, the post wasn't the only time Gaetz had offered his views about protests. In November 2021, the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse was winding down. Rittenhouse had killed 2 people and injured a third at a 2020 protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following the police shooting of Jacob Blake. However, Rittenhouse was ultimately cleared of all charges. Just prior to the announcement of the verdict, Gaetz addressed the case on Newsmax, saying, "You know what? Kyle Rittenhouse would probably make a good congressional intern. We may reach out to him and see if he'd be interested in helping the country in additional ways. He is not guilty. He deserves a not guilty verdict, and I sure hope he gets it." When it comes to energy production, Matt Gaetz has something of a strange track record. In fact, he was the only Republican to vote against the 2022 American Energy Independence from Russia Act, claiming that it would actually help Russia, according to Florida Politics. The Florida congressman also said that allowing drilling off the coast of Florida would interfere with the military research and testing that went on there. He then added, "That allows our military to maintain a qualitative edge over Russia, China, and the world." In early 2023, The Washington Post reported that Gaetz had asked for other House members to help him permanently block the possibility of new drilling sites off the coast of Florida. Again, he used the military's Gulf of Mexico-based testing facilities, along with Florida's tourist industry, as grounds for the ban. However, Texas Monthly pointed out that critics say it's more of a case of NIMBYism, or not in my backyardism. Those critics point out that Gaetz is only concerned with drilling when it happens in his state. They also note even though he used coastal communities and unique ecosystems as part of his reasoning, Gaetz still voted against banning drilling sites in national forests and wildlife refuges in Colorado and Alaska. In 2022, Matt Gaetz took a weird position on abortion, claiming bans were good for LGBTQ families. The congressman made the claims at a House Judiciary Committee hearing, saying, "I worry that if the LGBTQ community and the advocacy organizations for same-sex couples somehow reorients to be a pro-abortion enterprise, that could actually result in fewer same-sex couples having access to the family formation that gives them fulfilled lives." During the hearing, Gaetz also asked Sarah Warbelow, the legal director of the Human Rights Campaign, whether or not she was concerned that fewer same-sex couples would go on to have fulfilled lives if given access to abortion. Warbelow replied, "What I would be concerned about is forcing women to carry a pregnancy simply to satisfy another couple's desire to have a child. There are many methods of family formation. Many same-sex couples use fertility treatments, assisted reproductive technologies, in addition to adoption. If you or anyone you know has been a victim of sexual assault, help is available. Visit the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network website or contact RAIN's National Helpline at 1-800-656-HOPE 4673.